America is facing a crisis. We have freedom at risk in a country that's had it for 240 years. We're seeing one-party government arise.
As one of the founders said, a government big enough to give you everything you want can take everything you have. And what we see is now is a growing, expanding government that has taken away our freedoms.
At the inception of America, the Founding Fathers recognized the importance of having a limited government, hence the reason for having a separation of powers. But today we've seen many in the government attempt to gain more and more power through unconventional methods.
We've seen a trend for years of a growing state, in fact, government at all levels, but a lot of us never thought it could go this fast, this far. It's shocking. And even some liberals are waking up and saying, whoa, this is not what we had in mind. We have checks and balances for a reason. We saw what happens to nations that just have kings who can abuse their power. That's why America's founders went to so much trouble to divide the powers. And their idea was to put most of the power in the hands of the group closest to the people, which was the legislature, and in particular, the House of Representatives.
There has been a recurring theme throughout U.S. history of presidents usurping their enumerated powers.
Presidents, unfortunately, have a history of taking a license with the executive authority and doing all kinds of damage to the United States of America. For instance, Woodrow Wilson, in the early part of the 20th century, was highly uncomfortable with the Constitution. He was highly uncomfortable with the power that constitutionally was vested in the presidency. And in fact, he felt that in the progressive era, and as the first major progressive president, that in fact those lines should become more fuzzy between the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And Woodrow Wilson is the first president in a major way to go outside of those bright lines.
Many will remember FDR's plan to bring America out of the Great Depression.
It continued, of course, in a major way with Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the so-called New Deal, with the explosion of the role of the federal government in the average lives of Americans. It was almost unprecedented, all done through executive authority.
It is clear that there are those in government who will take advantage of a crisis to assert more power and control. Look at what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic.
I think that the whole COVID pandemic has had a huge impact two ways. One, it has allowed people in government to abuse their power, shut down churches, and treat them differently from other institutions. The other thing is that people can see the ways government can use a crisis to its advantage and have to be more alert than ever. So this is a wake-up call. America is waking up.
When you look at what's happened with COVID-19, we've seen a lot of incursions on constitutionally guaranteed rights and liberties. Now, COVID-19 might seem to be new, but if you look at it in terms of a medical pandemic, America has had a major medical pandemic about every 15 years since way back in the 1600s. It's not a new thing to have a pandemic. It's a new thing to have a pandemic where that civic officials ignore what the Constitution says and what the laws say, and they do what they want to do.
Another ploy for the federal government to aggregate more power is with the so-called climate crisis.
If you go back to the 1970s, started with global cooling. That didn't come to pass. Then that matured into global warming, which really hasn't come to pass either. They haven't had this green revolution that the left wants. Now they've turned climate change, climate weirding is my favorite term that they've come up with.
I find that when you're talking with actual climate scientists, geologists, oceanographers, atmospheric chemists and physicists and so on, you don't find, I think, anybody who believes the alarmist catastrophe around the corner message. Where you find this is with popularizers, with movement environmentalists, with people like Al Gore, politicians who see it as a way to promote their political careers.
In early 2019, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez introduced a climate bill known as the Green New Deal. A bill that, if passed, would have been a massive government intrusion. and would have resulted in the potential destruction of the US economy.
The Green New Deal that has been pushed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is something that simply will never fly. A fairly conservative estimate as to what it would cost to implement the Green New Deal puts it at around $500 billion a year for the US economy. The Green New Deal is predicated on the notion that human emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases like methane are causing such rapid and high magnitude global warming as to be catastrophic in the consequences over a fairly short period of time. Even if we're talking toward the end of this century on geologic scales, that's a pretty short period of time. The scientific basis for that notion is essentially zero. There is none.
The Green New Deal would destroy American prosperity as we know it.
While the Green New Deal was never passed, the Biden administration is currently trying to ram an infrastructure bill through Congress that has many of its radical climate policies.
It killed thousands of jobs and made us more dependent on foreign oil, just when America had achieved energy independence. This makes no sense at all, unless you're a climate extremist. And his administration appears to be populated with just those folks. In fact, they're using climate as a way to impose more and more government and more restrictions on what Americans can do.
Many fear that the Biden administration is encroaching on our rights yet again, as it signals a willingness to pack the US Supreme Court. A bill was introduced in Congress in April 2021 that would add 4 additional seats to the Supreme Court.
When President Roosevelt tried to pack the Supreme Court back in the 30s because the Supreme Court wouldn't go along with his socialistic New Deal schemes, he got pushback because people thought that was a bridge too far.
The proposal or the argument of that the left is going to pack the court is a really horrific idea. If people don't know what that means, it means we've had, for over 150 years, we've had 9 justices on the Supreme Court. This packing the court means I don't like what the court's rulings are, and so what I'm going to do is my party has control. We're going to add justices to the Supreme Court. So there's now going to be 13, and we're going to put 4 liberals on the court so that we get the opinions that we want. Packing the court means destroying the Supreme Court. Because if you add 4 and your party is in control now, as soon as you get out of power and the other party gets in, they're going to add 4 or 5 so they have control. The court is no longer an independent legal body. It's a pure political body.
With the very real threat of government overreach infringing on our rights, we should be wary of losing the liberties and freedoms that we enjoy today.
We thought we had a democratic republic with self-government, and now we're being ruled by a king who uses his pen to issue edicts right and left.
What this ultimately means, and this is what is really chilling, is that whatever right you care about, your right to free speech, your right to freedom of religion, your right to Second Amendment, you name your right, that right is no longer a right. It's a privilege that the ruling party gives you if they so decide.
We are forced to pledge allegiance not to God but government. And there has become a secular religion that is a part of this big government that forces all other faiths out. And there's only a faith to the state and what government can do. That's a dangerous place to be. We should not be dependent upon government. As Christians, our calling is to trust in God. In God we trust, not government.